When ladies first started going to school and college in the late 19th and early 20th century, most of them were involved in taking degrees and courses in household economics. Not only is home economics a junior or high school course in this day and age, but it was once a completely separate degree where ladies learned to become proper professional housewives, and wealthy husbands and fathers sent their young wives to be schooled in household hospitality. But why did the wealthy men do this? Did they just intend to push ladies out of the way from their working lives, or did men create for ladies what they themselves secretly longed? Men love their families by working and being away from their families. Ladies love their families by actually spending time with them. I'm sure that many men would be willing to spend more time with their children if they could, but in the late 19th and early 20th century, men didn't have that luxury. For most of the 20th century, the ideal state for ladies fed to ladies by society and men was for ladies to stay at home, bake cookies, take care of the kids, and keep the home tidy. This is the greatest way for ladies to stay out of the male sphere of influence, allowing men to get busy building 20th century infrastructure, including roads, railway networks, and the electric grid. Men built all that needed to get done. So what does this have anything to do with men going their own way? Ladies breaking free of the home was sold to ladies as a way for them to go their own. From what was regarded as oppressive male nature, they rebelled against being put in some of the most socially inhospitable places in the world that ladies have ever lived in. The suburbs are a disaster, not only because they're a complete waste of energy and resources, but because they cause horrible mental imbalances in ladies and children. And the irony is that ladies demanded more living space in the suburbs for their families back in the 1940s and 50s. But once they had the homes that they always wanted, ladies then tried desperately to escape that particular living arrangement. If I had to make a guess, I'd say that ladies didn't go to work in droves in the 1970s and 80s because of ladies' liberation and the third wave of feminism. But rather, I think they went to work because they were extremely lonely and bored in their suburban cookie-cutter homes, starved of all social interaction. So the choice came between living in a social desert or going to work and having other people around them. And when the first groups of ladies ventured into the workforce en masse in the 1960s, the environments were mostly different. So for the ladies that were pioneers, they received attention from the men at work and could communicate and not feel isolated and bored. But as more and more ladies entered the workforce, ladies had to start dealing with each other in increasingly female workspaces. Sure, they were no longer bored, but they now had to face the situation where they were increasingly arguing and bickering with other ladies at work and causing trouble for others. So the inevitable started happening. Ladies went from being socially starved, lonely, and unhappy at home to becoming even more miserable in the workforce. It's funny, but there are many surveys that talk about the idea that ladies have become less happy over the last 30 to 40 years since they entered the workforce en masse. They're less lonely today, but a lot less happy, because they're surrounded by other ladies. Ladies went from the social isolation frying pan in the suburbs and jumped into a working fire pit filled with other ladies, and as many ladies felt terrible for being alone for most days at home while their husbands and children were out. This ultimately led to a rise in no-fault divorce filings. Once ladies were allowed to divorce, and then with the introduction of no-fault divorce, ladies started divorcing their husbands due to increased unhappiness from being alone at home. Whose fault is this current social engineering hell that we find ourselves in? Men gave ladies what they thought would make ladies happy, and it didn't work. Men in the 20th century didn't want to have 5 to 10 children anymore, and families were leaving the farms and moving into the cities. Most men only wanted 2 or 3 kids tops, but the real problem was what to do with all their idle wives. So Edward Barnes, as well as many social engineers in the early to mid-20th century, began looking at ways to convince ladies to stay at home and build their nests while men went to work. But the social engineers could never have predicted the provocative revolution. Birth control pills, fault divorce destroyed the dream that many social engineers had designed, and ladies entering the workforce no longer felt the need to have a perfect home in the suburbs ready for children at any moment, because they could now get pregnant anytime they wanted. It was the fear of pregnancy and loss of control that got ladies into the suburbs in the first place, and birth control pills and no false divorce made them have enough control over their reproductive destinies to enter the workforce. It seems as though ladies were often content being lonely before the advent of the innovations of contraceptive technology. But once those technologies were created, that's when ladies felt free enough to enter the workforce up until the birth control pill and no-fault divorce. Ladies lived in fear of being abandoned by men if they weren't married to them. And back then, the only way that men would seemingly agree to the commitment of marriage is if he wasn't abandoned by his wife at any point while still being forced to deal with the financial obligation of dealing with children. Men back then seemed to understand what was going on far better than men today regarding men and women's with birth control. Ladies became free range and could come and go as they pleased. But for all of human genetic history, ladies were often protected and didn't usually have a say about their lives. They received new freedoms that they never had in nature, as well as in societies before the 1960s. So is it any wonder that ladies doing whatever they want these days is making them unhappier than ever? I think the whole idea of getting ladies angry at the patriarchy has to do with the idea that they resent it because in some ways, they don't have the ability to be happy and fulfilled in the modern world like men do. Ladies have to compete in man's world. If they don't really like this world, then why don't they go off and create their own system and invite men to live in it? But we all know that's not going to happen. I dare ladies to plan and build their own communities without any assistance for men. So either ladies integrate into the civilization built by men, or they have nothing at all. The irony is that lonely ladies armed with birth control pills and no-fault divorces are destroying the social fabric of our current civilization. And right now, there doesn't appear to be anything that we can do about this. We are in a desperate need of social scientists and social engineers to reorganize this global civilization before it drives off the metaphorical cliff like Thelma and Louise. One of the greatest tragedies of the human race is that each gender gives the other what they themselves want instead of seeing the other's drives and desires completely differently. Ironically, ladies are trying to give men what they think they want because ladies are more provocative ally promiscuous today because they think this is gonna make men happy. Birth control pills are probably supposed to make ladies feel free of the fear of unwanted pregnancy. Instead, they created a world where men and ladies could be as promiscuous as they want without the consequences that previous generations faced. Sure, ladies are less lonely and have more partners than they ever did in the past. But now the one thing that most ladies have been seeking their entire lives, commitment, completely evades most of. In the past, the problem of female loneliness was solved by ladies having half a dozen or more kids. Someone commented on my YouTube channel yesterday that he knew a pastor's wife with 8 children, and she was one of the most content people that he'd ever met. My grandmother took care of and raised 7 children, and only of them was her own biological kid, my father. And she also seemed very content and happy about most of her life. In the last 10 to 20 years of her life, all she seemed to talk about is the great job that she did raising. When I was growing up, the woman across the street from my parents' house, also a pastor's wife, had 5 kids. She appeared to be very happy surrounded by all these youngsters. In cities, children are a burden, but in the country, they're often a resource or a commodity to be consumed, and without kids, many ladies feel lonely. Yet many cities are becoming too expensive to afford children in the first place. I don't think that having 5 kids in today's grossly overcrowded world just to make ladies feel less lonely is a rational or sane thing to do. I'm just saying that the rapid social and technological progress of the last few hundred years might have had something to do with how lonely ladies felt at this point. There's no way to put the genie back in the bottle. And I guess my harshest criticism of the men's rights movement is that they want to put together the genie's lamp and shove the genie back in the lamp, which is now completely impossible because at this point, the social and cultural damage has already been done. Either we deal with it, or we keep wasting our time trying to return the laws to where they once were, which is impossible at this point. So to conclude this talk, I guess I want to say that for about a generation or two, ladies survived socially in suburban homes with no kids during the day and no husbands and maybe a pet or two. However, ladies are social creatures, so the environment of the early to late 20th century before ladies went to work deprived them of their emotional trials and tribulations. And ladies willingly allowed this to happen because they had a place ready and waiting to raise children in case they got pregnant, which was often one of their greatest fears. It was probably very boring for them, but at the same time, they were more comfortable with boredom than not having a safe place to raise their future kids, but with the invention of birth. Going to work looked like a grade to alleviate boredom when compared to staying at home in an empty and quiet house. Men constructed the living arrangements that men thought ladies would flourish in, but this didn't work and eventually backfired through the provocative revolution. Ironically, it was ladies that wanted to settle in the suburbs in the first place. Ladies lived through the age of the household renaissance in the 20th century, and in the end, it was a complete waste because the soap operas, radio programs, consumer culture, and gossip magazines were just a desperate outlet for ladies not getting the socialization that they really needed. So desperate times called for desperate measures, and I can now see why ladies thought that getting even a little bit of human interaction at work was better than staying at home, even if that interaction was negative. This had the effect of forcing the majority of ladies in our society today to get jobs, not by choice, but by force, because male salaries could no longer afford to keep an entire family going. Public media is yet additional outlet for socially isolated ladies these days. These types of things are just bad substitutes for ladies not having a baby in their hands to keep them occupied. Many ladies don't want kids these days, but the only thing that might calm them is a large number of kids surrounding them.